Commander Jack Reeves stood on the ridge overlooking Copper Canyon Ghost Town, scanning the terrain with practiced precision. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned buildings, highlighting decades of desert erosion and neglect. Through his high-powered binoculars, he methodically cataloged each structure. The old saloon with its partially collapsed roof, the two-story hotel with empty window frames like hollow eyes, the abandoned church with its listing steeple, and the scattered network of smaller structures that had once housed miners during the town's brief silver boom in the 1880s. "Perfect," he muttered, the word barely audible even to himself. Behind him, for men in desert camouflage tactical gear checked equipment with quiet efficiency. Though they wore no insignia now, their movements betrayed a shared history, the unmistakable synchronicity of men who had moved through hostile environments together for years, anticipating each other's actions without words. Eli Winters, the team's communications specialist, approached Jack with a tablet displaying topographical maps of the ghost town and surrounding hills. At 42, Eli was the oldest after Jack, with salt and pepper stubble and eyes that crinkled at the corners from years squinting against desert sun and ocean spray alike. "Drone survey confirms what the satellite imagery showed," Eli reported, his voice low and gravelly. 3 main streets, 22 structures still standing. No signs of civilian activity for at least 5 miles. Jack nodded, mentally revising the training scenario he'd been crafting for weeks. "Water tower gives overwatch of the entire main street. We'll use that as our high-value target position." "Like Samara?" asked Eli, referencing a particularly challenging operation in Iraq years earlier. "Similar, but with the added elements I briefed you on." Jack tapped the crumbling church spire. "Bell tower offers secondary sniper position if we need it." From behind them came the methodical clicks of weapons being assembled. Marcus Chin, their weapons specialist, was instructing the newest member of their team, Sean Harris, on the finer points of a specialized breaching tool. At 35, Marcus had the lean, coiled physique of a jungle cat and hands that could either disarm a bomb or perform emergency field surgery with equal precision. "Check the tension here," Marcus was saying, his Boston accent barely detectable after years of military discipline. "When you need to breach quietly, this will give you mechanical advantage without the noise of a power tool." Sean, just 30 and the youngest of their group, absorbed the instruction with intense concentration. His inclusion had been Jack's decision, overriding some concerns from the others. The kid had only served 2 tours with the SEALs before a knee injury forced medical retirement. But Jack had seen something in him during their final deployment together, an intuitive grasp of complex tactical situations that couldn't be taught. Completing their 5-man team was Ray Dockery, the team's medic and Jack's oldest friend. At 44, Ray had seen and patched enough battlefield trauma to staff a hospital ward. His massive frame, 6'4" and built like a defensive lineman, belied hands capable of incredible delicacy when treating wounds. Currently, he was organizing his medical kit, mentally preparing for the simulated casualties Jack had promised would be part of today's training scenario. "Comms check," Jack ordered, adjusting his tactical earpiece. 4 voices responded in sequence, professional and crisp. "Winters, check. Chun, check. Harris, check. Dockery, check." 5 years since they'd all worn the official trident of the Navy SEALs, but the discipline remained embedded in their DNA. Now they operated Exfil Trax, a private security training company specializing in preparing corporate security teams and select government contractors for high-risk operations. Today's exercise would test a new extraction protocol Jack had developed specifically for hostage situations in abandoned structures, scenarios increasingly common as cartels and terrorist groups utilized remote locations for operations. Jack felt the familiar tightening in his chest as his mind flickered unbidden to Caracas, 2018. The embassy hostage situation that had gone sideways, 3 civilians dead before his team could reach them. His last official mission before retirement, and the one that still haunted his sleep. He pushed the memory aside, focusing on the present. That's why today's training was so important. That's why exfil tracks existed, to ensure others wouldn't face those situations unprepared. Let's move to phase position, Jack ordered. We go active at 0930. As the team began their careful descent toward the ghost town, Jack's mind calculated distances, angles, and timelines. The abandoned settlement had once housed nearly 3,000 souls during its mining heyday. Now it would serve as the perfect training ground for the skills his team needed to keep sharp. The ghost town grew more impressive as they approached. What had seemed like dilapidated ruins from a distance revealed themselves as remarkably intact structures. The desert climate had preserved much of the wooden architecture, though signs of vandalism and amateur treasure hunters marred some buildings. "Place has good bones," observed Ray as they moved silently through the scrub brush. "Reminds me of that training compound outside Kandahar." Jack nodded, but remained focused on their approach. Despite the ghost town's remote location in the Nevada desert, 50 miles from the nearest paved road, they maintained full tactical discipline. Old habits. They established their base camp in a gully a quarter mile from town, concealed from view by a ridge of weather-worn boulders. While Marcus and Sean began unpacking the specialized training equipment, Jack pulled Eli and Ray aside to review the day's scenario once more. "I've programmed 6 different hostage configurations," Jack explained, showing them the tablet with building layouts. "The simulation will randomize which buildings are hot and how many tangos are present. Team gets 0 advance intel except confirmation that hostages are in the town." "Civilian roleplayers?" asked Ray. "Negative. We're using the new adaptive mannequins. They're pre-programmed with vitals that respond to proper or improper extraction techniques. If the team mishandles them, vitals crash just like a real casualty would." Eli whistled softly. "Those didn't come cheap." "Neither do funerals," Jack replied, more sharply than he'd intended. A brief silence fell. They all knew what drove him, what drove all of them, really. After Caracas, Jack had turned down a cushy Pentagon advisory position to start exfil tracks. Each man on his team had their own Caracas equivalent, missions or moments where the difference between textbook training and adaptable, experience-based judgment had meant life or death. The tension broke when Sean approached, carrying the case containing their communication hub. "Perimeter sensors are active, Commander. We've got full coverage for 300 meters in all directions." Jack nodded. "Good. And Sean, sir, we're not in the teams anymore. Just Jack is fine." Sean gave a slightly embarrassed smile. "Old habits." "Sorry, Jack." As Sean headed back to continue preparations, Eli gave Jack a knowing look. "Kid still sees you as the legendary Commander Reeves, the SEAL who led the Al-Basra extraction." Jack grimaced. "That wasn't even me. That was Team 3. Not according to the stories floating around Virginia Beach," Ray chuckled. "By the time those tales got done being filtered through BUD/S candidates, you'd personally rescued the president and taken down bin Laden." "Ridiculous," Jack muttered, though a faint smile tugged at his lips. The truth was more complicated. 16 years in the teams, 8 as an officer, with operations in theaters he still couldn't legally acknowledge. Jack had been effective, respected, decorated, but he knew better than anyone that SEAL mythology often overshadowed the grinding reality of their work. It wasn't about heroics. It was about preparation meeting opportunity, about teams functioning as seamless units rather than collections of individuals. That's what he was trying to instill in the corporate security teams that hired exfil tracks. The understanding that complex extractions weren't about individual heroism, but about systems, preparation, and teamwork. By 0900, the team had established their command post and deployed the simulation equipment throughout the ghost town. Jack watched with quiet pride as each man executed his responsibilities with clockwork precision. Marcus had rigged the simulated explosive devices and tripwires that would register as kills or injuries on their tactical vests if triggered. Sean had programmed the mannequins with various medical conditions and positioned them throughout the town. Ray had prepared the medical scenarios that would test extraction teams' ability to stabilize casualties during evacuation. And Eli had established the communications network that would allow Jack to observe and modify the scenario in real time. As Jack surveyed their work, he reflected on how far they'd come since starting the company 3 years ago. What had begun as a small training operation working primarily with private military contractors had expanded to include corporate security teams, specialized law enforcement units, and even limited work with friendly foreign services. Their reputation had grown with each successful training program, especially after the Rodriguez extraction. When insurgents had taken a Brazilian oil executive in Venezuela, it was an ex-Filtrax-trained security team that had executed the textbook rescue, without casualties. That success had put them on the map and brought in more high-level clients. Command post is operational, Eli reported, returning from his final equipment check. We've got eyes and ears throughout the town, and the simulation server is online. Jack checked his watch. 90 minutes until we run the first scenario. Let's do a walkthrough and make sure. The distant sound of vehicles interrupted him. 5 heads turned simultaneously toward the noise, their bodies instinctively shifting to lower profiles against the landscape. We expecting company? Marcus asked quietly, his hand already moving to the sidearm he carried, loaded with live ammunition rather than training rounds. Negative, Jack replied, reaching for the high-powered binoculars hanging around his neck. Eli. Perimeter sensors picked up multiple vehicles approaching from the south access road. Eli confirmed, checking his tablet. At least 3, maybe 4. Heavy SUVs or trucks. Cartel scouts sometimes use these back roads, Ray suggested, his voice dropping to a professional murmur. Or could be weekend warriors with ATVs. Jack trained his binoculars on the dust cloud now visible on the horizon. Too big for recreational vehicles, he assessed, focusing the image. I've got 3 black SUVs, tinted windows, antennas. Professional setup. Federal? Asked Sean, the tension in his voice betraying his relative inexperience compared to the others. Out here without contacting us first. Unlikely, Jack replied. We filed all the permits. BLM and county sheriff both have our operational plan. Through the powerful lenses, Jack watched as the vehicles approached the ghost town from its southern entrance. The deliberate way they positioned themselves, 1 vehicle at the entrance, 2 proceeding into the town center, triggered his professional instincts. This isn't random, he said quietly. They're establishing a perimeter. Military precision. Marcus had unkissed his spotting scope and was studying the new arrivals. I count 12 individuals from the vehicles. Armed, mixed weapons. Not law enforcement protocol. Moving like they've had training. Jack's mind raced through the possibilities. Drug runners. Human traffickers. Militia group. None of them good. All of them potentially volatile. Eli, go silent on comms. Passive receivers only, he ordered. Everyone, full tactical awareness from this point. We observe only until we know what we're dealing with. The team acknowledged with nods rather than words, years of operational discipline taking over. Sean looked to Jack for guidance, his younger face showing the controlled tension they all felt. What's the play here, Jack? He asked quietly as they moved to better observation positions. Jack's expression was grim as he watched the armed men begin systematically searching the ghost town buildings. For now, we gather intel and stay hidden. These aren't friendlies. He paused, watching as more men emerged from the vehicles. And whoever they are, they didn't come all this way to sightsee. Jack's team moved with silent efficiency to higher ground, finding natural depressions in the rocky terrain that offered both concealment and clear sight lines to the ghost town below. Years of operational experience had taught them to prioritize observation before action. Intelligence gathering was the foundation of any successful operation, planned or improvised. Through his spotting scope, Jack studied the newcomers' movements with growing concern. Their tactical formation as they swept through the buildings suggested professional training. Not military precision, but not amateurs either. I've got visual on at least 4 more tangos emerging from the lead vehicle, Marcus reported in a near whisper. That puts the total at 16, possibly more inside the vehicles. Armed? Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. Affirmative. Mix of long guns. Looks like AK variants mostly. Some sidearms visible. Body armor on a few. Eli had set up their directional microphone, the parabolic dish aimed at the center of town where most of the activity was concentrated. He adjusted his headphones, his expression growing increasingly grim as he listened. Spanish, he confirmed. Mexican dialect, not local. They're searching for something. No, someone. Mentions of testigos, witnesses. Jack processed this information, the tactical puzzle assembling in his mind. The ghost town was over 70 miles from the Mexican border, remote, but not impossible as a rendezvous point for cross-border operations. Cartel, Ray suggested, reading Jack's thoughts. This area has been seeing increased Sinaloa activity over the past year. Jack nodded. The intelligence briefings he received as part of Exfiltrax's security contracts had noted the shifting cartel territories, with Sinaloa pushing farther north into previously neutral zones. What had once been primarily drug transit routes were increasingly becoming operational areas for more diverse criminal enterprises, human trafficking, weapons smuggling, and enforcement actions against rivals or informants. We need to confirm if they're alone, Jack decided. Sean, circle west and get eyes on the southern approach. Make sure they don't have additional vehicles staged on the back roads. Sean nodded, immediately gathering his essential gear. The younger man moved like a shadow across the rocky terrain, his movements economic and precise despite his previous knee injury. El Comandante isn't happy, Eli reported, still monitoring the communications below. Something about timing being wrong. They expected the town to be empty. They're looking for something specific, Jack concluded. Or someone. The implications were troubling. If this was indeed a cartel operation, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate any witnesses. Jack and his team, though armed, were significantly outnumbered. Their weapons, carried for personal protection in the remote desert rather than combat operations, wouldn't match the firepower below if this turned into a direct confrontation. Movement at the saloon, Marcus reported suddenly. They're bringing someone out. Looks like civilians. 3. No, for individuals. Hands bound. Jack quickly adjusted his scope. Through the powerful lens, he could see 4 people, 2 men and 2 women, being roughly led from the old saloon building into the dusty main street. Their clothing suggested tourists. Hiking boots, cargo pants, photography vests. One man had a professional-looking camera still hanging from a strap around his neck. Hostages, Jack confirmed, his stomach tightening. Looks like we interrupted someone's ghost town photography expedition. Ray shifted position slightly, bringing his medical kit closer. Can you see if any are injured? Jack studied the group carefully, walking under their own power. Some roughing up maybe. The older male looks like he might have taken a hit to the face, dried blood visible. What the hell is a tour group doing out here? Marcus muttered. This place isn't exactly on the regular tourist circuit. Photographers sometimes charter private guides to these remote ghost towns, Eli explained. Urban exploration is big on social media. The more remote and untouched the location, the better for their portfolios. As they watched, the apparent leader of the armed group, a tall man with a distinctive silver streak in his dark hair, paced in front of the captives, gesturing angrily with a handgun. Even from this distance, his authority was evident in how the other armed men deferred to him. El Comandante, Jack guessed, referencing Eli's earlier intelligence. Likely Sinaloa lieutenant or higher, Ray agreed. Mid-level cartel guys don't usually lead operations this far north. Eli adjusted his headphones. They're interrogating them about someone else, another person they were supposed to meet here. The tourists keep saying they don't know anything. This just went from bad to worse, Jack said quietly, his mind already calculating scenarios. If they're looking for someone specific and these tourists can't help them find that person. He didn't need to finish the thought. They'd all seen enough cartel violence to know what typically happened to witnesses who couldn't provide useful information. Sean returned, moving low and fast across the terrain before dropping into position beside Jack. "Southern approach is clear," he reported. "No additional vehicles. But I found something else, a campsite about half a mile west, recently abandoned. Looks like someone left in a hurry. Tent still up, food left out. They're missing person," Jack deduced. "Someone who knew they were coming and got out just in time." Leaving these tourists as the only witnesses, Marcus added grimly. Jack weighed their options, none of them good. Protocol dictated notifying local authorities and maintaining surveillance from a safe distance. But the nearest sheriff's office was over an hour away, and given the hostages' situation, time was a critical factor. "Eli, make contact with Washoe County Sheriff. Use the satellite phone, no cellular transmissions. Tell them armed hostage situation, possible cartel involvement, for confirmed civilians at risk." As Eli moved to comply, Jack continued formulating their immediate response. "The rest of us maintain observation. Document everything: faces, vehicles, weapons. Intelligence will be crucial for any responding units." The team settled into their observation roles with practiced efficiency. Marcus began photographing the armed men with a high-powered telephoto lens, capturing faces and weapons configurations for future identification. Ray kept a log of movements and behavior patterns, noting which cartel members appeared to be in positions of authority. Sean focused on documenting the vehicles, including makes, models, and any visible license plates or identifying features. Jack kept his attention on the hostages and El Comandante, studying their interaction for clues about the cartel's intentions. 20 minutes later, Eli returned with news. Sheriff's office is dispatching units, but their nearest tactical team is assisting with a situation in Reno. Minimum response time of 75 minutes for regular deputies, 2 hours before any tactical personnel could arrive. "And the hostages don't have that kind of time," Jack observed, watching as 2 cartel members set up what appeared to be camera equipment. "They're preparing to film something." The implications hung heavily in the air. Cartel execution videos had become a macabre staple of their psychological warfare, both against rivals and as warnings to potential informants. "If they're setting up for what I think they are," Ray said quietly, "those people have maybe 30 minutes. Jack felt the familiar weight of command settling onto his shoulders, the burden of decisions where all options carried potentially fatal consequences. They were 5 men against at least 16 cartel members. They had the element of surprise and superior training, but the cartel had numbers, firepower, and hostages that complicated any intervention scenario. "We need more intelligence before we can even consider options," Jack decided. "Eli, can you get the drone up without them detecting it? Keep it high. Use maximum zoom." Eli nodded, already reaching for their compact tactical drone. "Winds are favorable. If I launch from the eastern ridge, I can keep it over the rock formations where the rotor noise will be masked." "Do it," Jack ordered. "I want overhead visuals of the entire town, building by building. We need to know exactly where every tango is positioned." As Eli departed to launch the drone, Jack turned to Ray. "Medical assessment if we have to go in?" Ray's expression was grimly professional. "Field conditions, multiple GSWs likely. I've got 3 trauma kits and battlefield essentials. Beyond initial stabilization, we need medevac within the golden hour." Jack nodded, then turned to Marcus. "Weapons inventory. 5 sidearms with standard loads. 2 tactical shotguns. My DMR with 40 rounds match-grade ammunition. For flashbangs, 2 smoke. Not exactly an armory." Against automatic weapons and superior numbers, Jack acknowledged. The assessment was blunt but necessary. If they committed to intervention, they would be doing so at a significant tactical disadvantage. Sean, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. We can't just watch it happen, Jack. The younger man's voice carried the moral certainty that Jack remembered from his own early days in the teams, before experience had taught him that the right choice wasn't always clear and good intentions didn't guarantee good outcomes. We're gathering intel to ensure we don't make it worse, Jack replied evenly. Heroics get hostages killed, Sean. You know that. Sean nodded reluctantly, accepting the wisdom even as his expression betrayed his struggle with the situation. Eli returned 15 minutes later, the drone controller in hand and a grim expression on his face. I've mapped their positions, he reported, showing Jack the tablet display with thermal imagery overlaid on the ghost town layout. 16 tangos confirmed, primarily concentrated in these 3 buildings. For hostages here, in what used to be the assay office. 2 guards on the hostages, the rest patrolling or manning observation points. Jack studied the imagery, noting the cartel's defensive positions and blind spots. They had established a reasonably effective perimeter, but they hadn't anticipated threats from elevated positions to the north, precisely where Jack's team was currently positioned. Their comms, he asked. Standard encrypted radios, but not military grade. They're operating on 2 channels, one for perimeter security, one for the leadership group. Can we intercept? Eli shook his head. Not with our current equipment. But their discipline is sloppy. They're talking more than they should be, which gives us some insight into their plans. And Jack prompted. They're expecting someone, a boss or higher up. Sounds like they swept the ghost town as advanced security and found these tourists by accident. Now they're waiting for instructions on what to do with them. This information changed the calculus significantly. If the cartel members were waiting for leadership to arrive, the immediate threat of execution might be delayed. Time frame on the VIP arrival? Jack asked. Unclear, but they're getting increasingly nervous. The tourists weren't part of the plan. As they processed this information, Marcus suddenly stiffened beside them, his eyes still to the spotting scope. Movement at the assay office, he reported. They're moving the hostages again. Jack quickly adjusted his own optics, focusing on the scene below. The 4 hostages were indeed being led out of the building and toward the center of the ghost town's main street. El Comandante was gesturing animatedly, apparently giving instructions to set up the camera equipment in a specific position. This is accelerating, Jack observed tensely. Something's changed their timeline. Eli was monitoring the directional microphone again. They just got a radio transmission, something about the boss being 10 minutes out. They want the situation cleaned up before he arrives. The implication was clear and chilling. The cartel didn't want their VIP arriving to find unexpected witnesses. We're out of observation time, Jack decided, his voice calm despite the gravity of his words. Eli, contact the sheriff again. Tell them execution imminent. We are engaging to protect civilians. The team's reaction was immediate, a subtle shift in posture, a checking of weapons, a shared glance that communicated more than words could. They had trained together for years, first in the military and then as civilians. They knew what Jack's decision meant and the risks it entailed. Tactical approach? Marcus asked, already mentally switching from observer to operator. Jack outlined his plan quickly, using the drone's thermal imaging as reference. We use the elevation advantage and their blind spots. 2-pronged approach. Marcus, you establish overwatch from the northern ridge with the DMR. Your priority is the 2 guards directly covering the hostages. The rest of us will infiltrate from the east, using the abandoned mine structures as cover. As the team prepared, Jack felt the familiar clarity that came with committed action. The doubts and competing scenarios that plagued planning were replaced by focused determination. The mission was now singular and clear: protect the hostages, neutralize the threat. Rules of engagement? Sean asked, checking his sidearm. We're civilians protecting civilians from imminent lethal threat, Jack replied. But make no mistake, these cartel members won't hesitate to kill. We aim to neutralize the threat with minimum force, but our priority is the hostages' survival and our own. Ray, always the conscience of the team, asked the question they were all considering. If this goes sideways, Jack. Then it does, Jack replied firmly. But we don't leave those people to die when we have the capability to intervene. That's not who we are. That's not who we've ever been. The team nodded in silent agreement. For all their corporate training work and civilian status, they remained at their core the men who had sworn to stand between the innocent and harm's way. Comms check, Jack ordered, and each team member confirmed their equipment was functioning. Marcus, you move first. Get in position and give us confirmation when you have sight lines on the primary targets. Marcus nodded, gathering his rifle and moving out with the fluid efficiency that had made him one of the team's most respected marksmen during their service years. As they waited for Marcus to reach his position, Jack observed the scene below with growing urgency. The cartel members had positioned the 4 hostages kneeling in a row, facing the camera they'd set up. El Comandante was speaking directly to the camera, likely recording some kind of statement or warning. Classic cartel execution setup, Ray observed quietly. We're not going to let it happen, Jack assured him, then turned to address the team. Once we initiate, this unfolds fast. First priority is eliminating the immediate threat to the hostages. Secondary priority is securing the hostages and moving them to cover. We are not, I repeat, not, attempting to neutralize all cartel members unless absolutely necessary for our extraction. The radio crackled softly as Marcus's voice came through. Overwatch established. I have eyes on both hostage guards plus El Comandante. Range confirmed, conditions optimal. Copy, Jack replied. Stand by for my signal. Below them, El Comandante had finished his camera statement and was now gesturing to one of his men, who approached with what appeared to be a machete. The grim purpose was unmistakable. No more time, Jack decided. Marcus, you are green to engage the guard with the machete on my mark. Eli, Ray, Sean, we move immediately after the first shot, using the distraction to close distance to the eastern buildings. The team confirmed their understanding of the plan. Jack took one final survey of the scene, noting positions, distances, and potential complications. Then he spoke the words that would irrevocably commit them to action. Marcus, execute. The crack of Marcus's rifle shattered the desert silence. Through his scope, Jack watched the cartel member with the machete crumple to the ground. An instant later, a second shot dropped the guard standing directly behind the hostages. Moving, Jack ordered, and his team descended the rocky slope with controlled urgency. The cartel members below erupted into confused activity. Some dove for cover while others fired wildly toward the ridge where Marcus's shots had originated, exactly as Jack had anticipated. The misdirection gave his infiltration team precious seconds to close the distance to the eastern edge of the ghost town. Jack led them through a narrow arroyo that provided cover all the way to the remains of an old or processing facility. The building's crumbling walls offered both concealment and firing positions overlooking the town's main thoroughfare where the hostages knelt, now unguarded but fully exposed in the ensuing chaos. Eli, Ray, cover the northern approach. Sean, with me, Jack directed, his voice calm despite the gunfire now echoing through the ghost town. Marcus, status? 2 tangos down, 3 more pinned behind the water tower. Marcus reported through the comm. They've identified my general position, but not my exact location. I'm repositioning now. Copy. Maintain overwatch and prevent reinforcement of the center area. Jack and Sean moved through the abandoned or facility toward the hostages, using the building's maze of rusted machinery for cover. Through gaps in the walls, Jack could see the 4 civilians still kneeling in the dirt, heads down, clearly terrified and uncertain what the gunfire meant for their situation. About 40 meters separated them from the hostages, with minimal cover in between, just a few scattered barrels and an abandoned wagon. The main threat came from the saloon across the street, where 3 cartel members had taken defensive positions and were firing sporadically toward Marcus's last known location. Eli, can you get eyes on the approach to the hostages? Jack asked. Negative from my position, Eli responded. Wait, drone is still active. Redirecting now. Seconds later, Eli's voice returned with urgency. Jack, you've got 2 tangos approaching the hostages from the south building. Looks like they're going to relocate them, or worse. We need a diversion, Jack decided instantly. Ray, flashbang into the saloon on my mark. Ready, Ray confirmed, already preparing the non-lethal explosive. Execute in 3, 2, 1, mark. Ray's throw was perfect, the flashbang sailing through a broken window of the saloon. The resulting explosion of light and sound sent the cartel members inside diving for cover, temporarily disoriented. Moving to hostages now, Jack announced, and he and Sean sprinted from their position toward the kneeling civilians. They had covered half the distance when automatic gunfire erupted from their right flank. One of the cartel members had recovered faster than expected and was now firing in their direction with an AK-47. Sean grunted and stumbled, but kept moving. Jack noted the younger man's pained expression, but couldn't address it now. The mission priority remained reaching the hostages before the approaching cartel members could secure them. They reached the civilians just as 2 cartel members emerged from the southern building. Jack engaged the closer threat, his sidearm barking twice. The cartel member fell. Sean, despite his injury, pivoted and fired at the second attacker, forcing him back into the building. We're Americans, Jack told the wide-eyed hostages, speaking quickly as he cut their bonds with his tactical knife. We're here to get you out. Can you all walk? The oldest man, his face bruised from earlier rough handling, nodded shakily. Yes, we can move. Thank God you're here. Stay low. Move exactly where we tell you. When we tell you, Jack instructed. Sean's status? I'm good, Sean replied tightly, though the growing bloodstain on his upper arm suggested otherwise. Flesh wound. Can still operate. Jack made a quick tactical assessment. Their current position remained highly exposed. They needed to move the hostages to cover immediately, but the most direct route back to the processing facility was now under fire from multiple positions. Change of plan, he decided. We move north to the church. Marcus, can you cover our movement? Affirmative, Marcus responded. I've relocated to the ridge spur. I have sightlines on the main street and can suppress fire from the saloon. Copy. Covering fire on my mark. Jack turned to the hostages. When I say move, stay low and run directly to that church building. Don't stop for anything. Ready? 3, 2, 1, move. Marcus's precision fire rained down on the saloon as Jack and Sean escorted the 4 civilians across the exposed street toward the church. Bullets kicked up dust around them, but Marcus's suppressing fire kept the cartel members pinned down long enough for the group to reach the relative safety of the old wooden structure. Once inside, Jack directed the hostages to take cover behind the heavy wooden pews while he assessed their new position. The church offered better protection than their previous location, with thick walls and limited access points. Just the main entrance and a small rear door leading to what had once been the pastor's quarters. Hostages secured in the church, Jack reported over the comm. Eli, Ray, reposition to our location. Marcus, maintain overwatch. Copy, came the responses. Sean, let me see that arm, Jack said, turning his attention to his injured teammate. Sean reluctantly revealed the gunshot wound, a hand throw to his upper right arm that was bleeding steadily but had missed major arteries. Ray will patch you up when he gets here. For now, Jack pulled a pressure bandage from his tactical vest and quickly applied it to stem the bleeding. Sean winced but didn't complain. I can still shoot. Left hand if necessary. Jack nodded, respecting the younger man's determination while making a mental note to ensure Ray gave the wound proper attention once they regrouped. He turned his attention to the hostages, 3 men and 1 woman, all appearing to be in their 40s or early 50s, dressed for a photography expedition. They looked shell-shocked but physically unharmed apart from the older man's facial bruising. I'm Jack, he said, keeping his voice calm and authoritative. "We're a private security team that was training nearby when we observed your situation. Help is coming, but it's at least an hour out. We need to keep you safe until then. Can you tell me your names and what happened?" The older man, evidently the leader of their group, spoke up. "I'm David Mercer. This is my wife Linda, and our friends Tom and Craig. We're photographers documenting ghost towns for a book project. We had no idea anyone else would be out here." "How long have they held you?" Jack asked, dividing his attention between the conversation and the tactical situation outside. "Since early morning," Linda replied, her voice steadier than Jack might have expected. "We camped about 2 miles from here last night and arrived around dawn to catch the morning light. We were setting up equipment when those men appeared. They kept asking about someone else," Tom added. "Someone they thought we were meeting here. They wouldn't believe we didn't know anything about it." This confirmed what Eli had overheard earlier. The cartel had been expecting someone specific, likely an informant or rival, and had instead found civilians who had the misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The church door opened, and Eli and Ray slipped inside, moving quickly to defensive positions. "Perimeter?" Jack asked. "They're regrouping," Eli reported. "I count at least 10 still active, concentrating around the saloon and hotel. They've stopped firing randomly and appear to be coordinating their next move." "Which means El Comandante is still in control," Jack noted grimly. "Where is he?" "Can't confirm. Last visual was him moving into the hotel after the initial engagement." Ray immediately moved to examine Sean's wound, expertly removing the temporary pressure bandage and assessing the damage. "Clean hand throw," he announced. "Missed anything vital, but you're going to need stitches when we get out of here." He administered a battlefield analgesic and began properly dressing the wound. Jack used the momentary pause to reassess their situation. They had successfully reached and freed the hostages, but now found themselves in a defensive position with limited options for extraction. The nearest viable extraction point, their base camp with the vehicles, was nearly half a mile away, through terrain now actively patrolled by hostile forces. "Marcus status?" Jack requested. "I have clear sight lines on the main approaches to your position," Marcus reported. "They've established a perimeter and are bringing in the vehicles. I think they're planning to flush you out." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Once the cartel brought their vehicles into play, they could use them for both cover and mobility, negating much of Marcus's Overwatch advantage. "Eli, drone update." Eli checked the tablet controlling their surveillance drone. "Still operational, but battery at 42%. Maybe 15 minutes of flight time remaining. Get it over the hotel. I want eyes on El Comandante and whatever they're planning." As Eli repositioned the drone, Jack conducted a quick inventory of their resources. Between the 4 team members in the church, they had 3 sidearms with limited ammunition, 1 tactical shotgun, 2 remaining flashbangs, and 1 smoke grenade. Marcus had his designated marksman rifle with perhaps 30 rounds remaining. Against at least 10 cartel members with automatic weapons and vehicles, they were significantly outgunned. "The sheriff's ETA?" Jack asked. "Last update was 50 minutes, Eli replied. "And that's just the regular deputies, not tactical teams." Jack processed this information with the cold calculation that had kept him alive through years of high-risk operations. Their options were limited and grew more constrained with each passing minute. A sudden memory flashed through his mind. Caracas, 2018. The embassy hostage situation. The feeling of time slipping away while hostages remained at risk. The decision to wait for additional support that had come too late. He pushed the memory aside, focusing on the present. This time was different. This time they were already engaged, already committed. "Jack," Eli interrupted his thoughts. "Drone has visual on El Comandante. He's coordinating something big. They're breaking out heavier weapons from one of the SUVs." Jack moved to view the tablet screen. The thermal imagery showed a cluster of figures around one of the vehicles, removing what appeared to be long objects from the rear compartment. "Rifles?" he asked, studying the shapes. Worse, Eli replied grimly. Looks like they've got at least one RPG launcher. The revelation changed the tactical calculus dramatically. The church's adobe walls might withstand small arms fire, but they'd offer minimal protection against rocket-propelled grenades. Time to change the paradigm, Jack decided. We can't remain static. He turned to his team and the hostages, outlining the situation with direct honesty. The cartel is bringing up heavier weapons. This position won't remain secure. We need to move before they can organize a coordinated assault. Move where? David asked, understandable fear in his voice. We're surrounded. Not entirely, Jack responded. This town has one feature that might work to our advantage, the old mine system. Tom's eyes widened with recognition. The tunnels. I researched them for our book. Some connect multiple buildings in town. Exactly, Jack confirmed. Eli, does the drone thermal show any heat signatures below ground level? Eli adjusted the imaging parameters. Nothing conclusive, but there are temperature differentials consistent with subsurface openings in several locations. These towns typically had emergency exits from public buildings, Tom offered. Churches especially often had connections to mines or underground passages, both for safety during Apache raids and sometimes to smuggle liquor during Prohibition. Jack nodded. We need to find the access point. Everyone, spread out and check for trapdoors, unusual flooring, anything that might indicate a passage. As the group began searching the church, a new sound reached them from outside, the rumble of approaching vehicles. Marcus, update, Jack requested urgently. 2 SUVs moving into town from the south, Marcus reported. Different from the original vehicles. More arriving. El Comandante's boss, Jack concluded. The VIP they were waiting for. The arrival of cartel leadership would likely accelerate the timeline for assault. Cartel bosses typically traveled with additional security, meaning the opposition force was about to grow substantially. Here, Linda called from behind the altar. There's a trapdoor under this rug. Jack moved quickly to her position. Sure enough, beneath a faded carpet was a wooden trapdoor, its iron ring handle nearly rusted shut from decades of disuse. Ray, Sean, help me with this, Jack ordered. With combined effort, they managed to pull the heavy door open, revealing a dark passage below with crude wooden stairs descending into darkness. Looks stable, Jack assessed, shining his tactical flashlight into the opening. Eli, any intel from town records about where these tunnels lead? Eli was already searching through the data they'd compiled during their pre-training research. Limited information, but historical accounts mention connections between the church, the assay office, and the mine entrance on the northern periphery. The north mine entrance is close to our exfil route, Jack noted. If they could navigate the tunnel system to that exit, they'd be positioned for a direct route to their vehicles with minimal exposure. We don't know the condition of these tunnels, Ray pointed out reasonably. They could be collapsed anywhere along the route. True, Jack acknowledged. But right now, it's our best option for getting the hostages to safety. Outside, the sound of vehicles had stopped, replaced by the unmistakable cadence of commands being issued. The cartel was organizing its forces for a coordinated approach. Decision time, Jack said. We go underground, try to reach the northern exit, and extract to our vehicles. Marcus, once we're in the tunnel, relocate to the northern perimeter and prepare to cover our exit. Copy that, Marcus confirmed. Wait, Sean interjected. What if the tunnel is collapsed? We'd be trapped. It was a valid concern, one that Jack had already factored into his decision calculus. If we encounter a blockage, we reassess. The tunnels likely have multiple access points. We find another exit or return here if necessary. The sound of approaching footsteps outside the church doors added urgency to their situation. No more time for debate, Jack decided. Everyone down the passage, now? Ray, you lead with the hostages. Eli follows. Sean and I will cover our retreat. As the others began descending into the darkness, Jack and Sean took up defensive positions facing the church doors. Outside, they could hear the cartel members taking positions surrounding the building. A voice called out in accented English, "Americans, we know you are in there with our guests. There is no reason for more bloodshed. Send out the photographers, and you may leave with your lives." Jack recognized the voice from the surveillance. El Comandante, attempting negotiation before assault. It was a standard cartel tactic, though rarely sincere. "They're trying to fix our position before they hit us with the RPG," Jack observed quietly to Sean. No response. Sean nodded, wincing slightly as the movement aggravated his wounded arm. Below, Ray called up softly. "Everyone's in the tunnel. Structure seems sound so far." "Go," Jack told Sean. "I'll be right behind you." Sean hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave Jack alone, but military discipline prevailed. He moved to the trapdoor and descended into the darkness. Jack waited until Sean was clear, then backed slowly toward the opening, maintaining his aim at the church doors. As he reached the trapdoor, a new sound emerged from outside, the distinctive metallic click of an RPG launcher being prepared. Time had run out. Jack dropped through the opening, pulling the trapdoor closed above him just as a tremendous explosion rocked the church. The concussion wave sent dust and debris raining down on him as he descended the stairs, joining the others in the tunnel. "Everyone okay?" he asked, sweeping his flashlight across the group. Shaken nods answered him. The tunnel was surprisingly large, obviously dug to accommodate miners carrying equipment. The ceiling stood about 7 feet high, supported by aged but still solid timber bracing. The floor was packed earth, relatively level, with narrow-gauge rail tracks running along its center, once used for carts. "Structural damage from the blast?" Jack asked Ray, who had been examining the tunnel's integrity. "Nothing critical that I can see. These tunnels were built to withstand mining explosions. A surface RPG isn't likely to collapse them, especially this far down." Jack activated his comm unit. "Marcus, church has been hit with RPG. We're in the tunnel system now, proceeding north. Any visuals on cartel response?" Static answered him. The thick earth above them blocked radio transmission. "Comms compromised underground," Jack noted, unsurprised. "We're on our own until we surface." He turned to Tom, who had mentioned researching the tunnels. "Any idea how this system is laid out?" Tom looked uncertain. "My research was historical, not structural. I know these tunnels connected key buildings and led to the main mine entrances, but I don't have details on the specific routes." "Then we navigate by reasoning and dead reckoning," Jack decided. "The tracks are our best indicator. They would have led from the mine entrances to buildings where or was processed or valued. North mine entrance is our target," Eli reminded them, examining the tunnel with his flashlight. "These tracks seem to run east-west here." Jack studied the tunnel junction before them. The main passage continued straight ahead with the tracks, while a smaller tunnel branched off to the right, heading northward. "We follow the northern branch," he decided. "The main tracks likely connect the major buildings in town, but we want to avoid those. The cartel will check them first once they realize we've gone underground." The group proceeded down the narrower tunnel, moving as quickly as caution allowed. The hostages, though clearly frightened, maintained remarkable composure, following directions without question. Jack noted that Linda in particular seemed to have a steady nerve, helping her more shaken husband navigate the unfamiliar darkness. After about 50 meters, the tunnel branched again. Jack halted the group. "Eli, thoughts?" he asked, deferring to his team members' analytical skills. Eli studied the junction, then pulled out a compass from his tactical vest. "Main branch continues north-northwest, which aligns with the direction of the northern mine entrance. The eastern branch likely connects to another building in town." "North-northwest it is," Jack confirmed. The tunnel began to slope gradually upward, which Jack took as a positive sign. They were approaching the hillside where the main mine entrance had been constructed. Suddenly, Sean at the rear of their formation raised a closed fist, the universal signal to halt. Jack immediately understood, hearing what Sean had detected, voices echoing through the tunnel system. They found the church trapdoor, Jack whispered. Everyone, lights off except for mine. Stay close to the wall. The group pressed themselves against the rough tunnel wall as Jack dimmed his flashlight to the minimum necessary to see. The voices grew louder, then seemed to fade slightly. The cartel members had entered the tunnel system but had taken a different branch. They don't know which way we went, Ray observed quietly. They'll have to search each branch. Which buys us time, but not much, Jack responded. We need to move faster. They proceeded with increased urgency, the tunnel continuing to slope upward. After another 100 meters, they encountered a wooden door set into the right side of the passage, their first potential exit point. Jack approached it cautiously, examining the ancient timber construction. The door appeared to lead into a small chamber rather than to the surface. Cover, he instructed the others, then carefully tested the handle. It turned with surprising ease, suggesting it had been used relatively recently, perhaps by the photographers during their research, or by others exploring the ghost town. Jack eased the door open, revealing a small equipment room with mining tools still hanging on the walls. At the far side was another door, this one sturdier and with a small, dust-covered window at eye level. Moving quietly, Jack crossed to this second door and peered through the grimy glass. Beyond was what appeared to be the interior of a building dimly lit by sunlight filtering through boarded windows. I think we're in the assay office, he whispered to the others. Which means we're still in town, not at the perimeter. This was both good and bad news. They hadn't reached their intended exit point, but they now had a reference for their location within the ghost town's layout. The assay office is here, Eli confirmed, consulting the town map on his tablet. Northern mine entrance is still about 300 meters in that direction. He pointed toward the far wall of the equipment room. Options? Ray asked. Jack considered their situation. They could continue through the tunnel, hoping to find a direct route to the northern exit. Or they could surface here, get their bearings, and potentially move faster above ground, albeit with greater exposure to enemy forces. The decision was complicated by several factors. Sean's injury, the civilians' limited stamina for continued tunnel navigation, and the unknown condition of the remaining tunnel sections. Additionally, they had lost communication with Marcus, leaving them without critical intelligence on cartel positions. A sudden burst of gunfire from somewhere above and behind them made the decision clearer. The cartel forces were shooting into the tunnels through access points, a standard clearing tactic when pursuing targets in confined spaces. We surface here, Jack decided. The gunfire will cover any noise we make. We assessed the situation, then moved building to building toward the northern perimeter. The team prepared for potential contact as Jack slowly opened the door into the assay office. The room beyond was empty, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that penetrated the boarded windows. Clear, he whispered, and the group moved into the building. The assay office was a substantial structure with thick stone walls, once used to test and value or samples from the mines. Its windows were small and positioned high on the walls, originally a security feature to prevent theft, now providing them with coverage from external observation. Jack moved to one of the windows, carefully creating a small viewing gap between the boards. From this vantage point, he could see a section of the town's main street, including the now-damaged church about 100 meters away. Cartel members were visible, moving with purpose between buildings. I count 8 tangos visible from this position, he reported quietly. They're conducting a building-by-building search. Can you see the northern edge of town? Ray asked. Jack adjusted his position. Partially. There's movement near the old foreman's office, but I can't confirm if it's cartel or local wildlife. We need to re-establish communication with Marcus, Eli noted. From inside this building, we might get enough elevation for the signal to reach the ridge. Jack nodded. Try it. Eli activated his comm unit. Marcus, this is Eli. Do you copy? Static answered him at first, then a broken transmission. Position, vehicles moving, north entrance. Signals weak, but present, Eli confirmed. He's trying to tell us something about vehicles and the north entrance. Jack processed this fragmentary intelligence. If cartel vehicles were moving toward the northern exit, their planned escape route might already be compromised. The distant sound of approaching helicopters added a new dimension to the tactical situation. It could be law enforcement finally arriving, or it could be additional cartel resources. Either way, the situation was escalating beyond their initial assessment. We need to move now, Jack decided. If that's law enforcement, we want to be clear of the central conflict zone when they arrive. If it's cartel reinforcement, we definitely don't want to be here. He turned to the hostages. We're going to move quickly and quietly to the north edge of town. Stay low, follow our exact path, and do exactly as we say. Understood. Four determined nods answered him. Jack outlined the route to his team, using the building layout map they'd studied during their pre-training preparation. From here, we moved to the mining company office, then to the superintendent's house, then through the equipment yard to the north entrance. We stay inside buildings whenever possible, using connecting doors rather than exposing ourselves in the open. With the plan established, they moved to the assay office's rear door, which opened into a small courtyard connecting to the adjacent building exactly as their archival research had indicated. Jack checked the courtyard, found it clear, and led the group across to the mining company office. Building by building, they worked their way north, encountering no opposition. The cartel's attention appeared focused on the tunnel system in the southern part of town where the initial confrontation had occurred. As they reached the equipment yard, their last covered position before the final approach to the northern mine entrance, the helicopters grew noticeably louder. Two craft, coming from the south, Sean observed, his military training evident in the precision of his assessment despite his injury. Through gaps in the equipment yard's corrugated metal roof, Jack caught glimpses of the aircraft, black helicopters with no visible law enforcement or military markings. Not friendlies, he concluded grimly. Cartel air support. This development severely compromised their extraction plan. The helicopters would have thermal imaging capabilities, making movement in open terrain extremely hazardous. As if confirming his assessment, one of the helicopters banked sharply, beginning a systematic search pattern over the northern periphery of the ghost town, directly in their planned exit route. They're looking for us specifically, Jack realized. They know we're heading north. Their options were rapidly diminishing. With cartel forces converging on the ground and air support actively searching, their window for clean extraction was closing. Jack made a rapid tactical reassessment. New plan. We hold position here temporarily. Once those helicopters establish their search pattern, we can identify the gaps and time our movement accordingly. The equipment yard offered reasonable concealment from aerial observation, with its metal roof and cluttered interior filled with abandoned mining machinery. If they remained still and kept to the shadows, they might avoid thermal detection. And if they land reinforcements? Ray asked, giving voice to the concern they all shared. Then we adapt, Jack replied simply. The unspoken reality hung between them. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and rapidly running out of options. But they weren't out of the fight yet. In that moment, Jack felt the weight of command more acutely than at any time since his active duty days. For civilians and his team were counting on his decisions to get them out alive. The specter of Caracas loomed in his mind, the hostages he hadn't been able to save. Not this time, he resolved silently. This time would be different. Jack studied the helicopter's search pattern through a gap in the equipment yard's rusted roof. The aircraft maintained a methodical grid sequence, focusing primarily on the open terrain between the ghost town's northern edge and the distant hills. Its thermal imaging would be most effective in those exposed areas. They're expecting us to make a run for it, he observed to Eli, who was monitoring the second helicopter's movements. Standard containment strategy. Use ground forces to flush targets into open terrain where air support can easily track them. Textbook cartel tactic, Eli agreed. They've had years to refine their interdiction techniques along smuggling routes. The distant sound of vehicles added to Jack's situational awareness. The cartel was repositioning ground forces to complement the aerial search. We need communications with Marcus, Jack decided. He's our eyes on their deployment. Eli adjusted his comm unit, attempting to boost the signal. Marcus, this is Eli. Respond if you copy. This time, the reply came through with greater clarity. Copy, Eli. I've relocated to the northwest ridge. Be advised, Cartel has established blocking positions along all northern approaches. 2 vehicles at the mine entrance, 3 more on the access road. What about our vehicles at base camp? Jack asked. Appears secure for now. They haven't located it yet. Recommend against northern exfil. Repeat, northern route is compromised. This intelligence drastically altered their options. With the north blocked, the east and west flanks under aerial surveillance, and the south occupied by the main cartel force, there appeared to be no clear extraction path. What about the sheriff's response? Jack inquired. Observed law enforcement vehicles approaching from the south-southeast, Marcus reported. ETA approximately 20 minutes based on current progress. Be advised, they appear to be standard patrol units, not tactical response. Regular deputies against cartel helicopters and heavily armed ground forces would be severely outmatched. If Jack's team and the hostages were still in the conflict zone when that engagement began, the crossfire would present an even greater threat than their current situation. Alternatives. Ray asked quietly, reading Jack's expression. Jack systematically assessed their position, resources, and the evolving threat landscape. His mind calculated probabilities and risks with the cold efficiency that had kept him alive through countless operations. Marcus, he said finally, what's between our current position and base camp? Approximately 1 mile of broken terrain. 2 ridgelines, a dry creek bed, moderate scrub coverage. Limited visibility from air in the creek bed, but you'd be exposed crossing the ridgelines. And the helicopter's search pattern? Primary focus is north and northeast. Secondary helicopter is making periodic sweeps to the northwest, roughly 5-minute intervals between passes. Jack nodded to himself, a plan forming. We need a diversion. Something significant enough to draw attention away from our actual movement. The buildings themselves, Sean suggested, his voice tight with pain but his tactical mind still sharp. Ghost Town's been abandoned for decades. Dry timber, plenty of combustible materials. A fire, Jack considered, immediately grasping the strategic value. Set a controlled burn at the southern end of town. Forces them to redirect resources. Creates thermal confusion for their imaging systems. Eli looked concerned. Fire in these conditions could spread quickly. We need to ensure it doesn't cut off our own escape route. Or endanger the responding deputies, Ray added. Jack weighed these considerations against their increasingly limited options. A controlled burn carried significant risks, but their alternatives were dwindling by the minute. The old livery stable, he decided. It's isolated enough to create a significant diversion without immediate spread to other structures. Marcus, confirm wind direction. South to north, approximately 8 to 10 knots. Perfect. The smoke would blow toward the northern blockade, further obscuring movement in that direction while the fire itself drew attention to the southern end of town. Ray, prepare the smoke grenade. Eli, use the remaining flashbangs to create secondary diversions at the eastern edge. Sean, you'll stay with the civilians and guide them along the western route once the diversion is active. I'll set the fire, then join you at the creek bed rendezvous. The team acknowledged their assignments with nods. The hostages, who had remained remarkably composed throughout their ordeal, exchanged nervous glances but maintained their trust in Jack's leadership. Once we initiate, we'll have approximately 3 minutes before they realize it's a diversion, Jack continued. We use that window to move southwest, parallel to the creek bed, then northwest toward base camp during the 5-minute gap between helicopter passes. And if they adapt faster than anticipated? Ray asked. always the voice of contingency planning. Then we improvise, Jack replied simply. But they won't. Cartel operations prioritize protection of product and cash above all else. A fire threatens both. Their training will compel them to respond to the immediate threat before resuming pursuit. The plan established, the team made final preparations. Jack checked Sean's wound, ensuring the bandage remained secure. The younger man's face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes remained clear and determined. I can keep going, Sean assured him, reading the concern in Jack's expression. I know you can, Jack replied, with genuine confidence. Get these people home, Sean. To the hostages, Jack provided clear, concise instructions. Stay with Sean. Move exactly when and where he tells you. If you become separated for any reason, continue west-northwest until you reach the creek bed, then follow it upstream. Help each other. The photographers among you are used to moving carefully through rough terrain. Use those skills now. David, the group's informal leader, nodded. We'll follow your man's lead. And thank you for coming for us when you had no obligation to. Jack acknowledged this with a simple nod, then turned to final coordination with his team. Synchronize watches. Diversion initiates in exactly 5 minutes. Questions? There were none. Each man knew his role and the stakes involved. Move out, Jack ordered, and the team dispersed to their assigned positions. Jack made his way through the abandoned buildings toward the livery stable, moving with the practiced stealth of a man who had spent years operating in hostile territory. The stable was a large wooden structure at the southwestern edge of town, its timbers baked to perfect combustibility by decades of desert sun. Positioning himself at the rear of the building, Jack waited for the precise moment. When his watch indicated the designated time, he struck a military-grade incendiary device and tossed it through a broken window into a pile of ancient hay and wood shavings. The material caught immediately, flames spreading with hungry efficiency through the desiccated structure. Jack was already moving away as the fire took hold, circling wide to avoid detection. Almost simultaneously, he heard the distinctive pop of the smoke grenade from the equipment yard, followed seconds later by the sharp cracks of flashbangs at the eastern periphery. The diversions were in place. The cartel response was immediate and predictable. The helicopter nearest the fire banked sharply, abandoning its search pattern to investigate the sudden conflagration. Radio chatter increased dramatically as ground forces responded to the multiple disturbances. Moving through the concealment provided by outlying structures, Jack observed Sean leading the hostages and Ray along the predetermined route. Eli joined them from his position, and the group disappeared into a gully that would take them toward the creek bed. Jack advanced to his own link-up position, using the confusion of the burning stable to mask his movement. The fire was spreading more rapidly than anticipated, already engulfing adjacent structures and creating a wall of smoke that drifted northward on the prevailing wind. He reached the gully just as Sean was helping the last hostage down its steep side. Jack slid down to join them, landing lightly beside Ray. Fire's drawing the expected response, he reported. Both helicopters diverted, ground forces converging from multiple directions, including some from the northern blockade? Ray asked. Affirmative. At least one vehicle observed moving south. This was crucial. It meant their planned route would have reduced opposition. The diversion was working exactly as intended. Marcus, status? Jack spoke into his calm, northern blockade reduced by approximately 40%, came the reply. Critical gap identified on the northwestern approach. Second helicopter returning to search pattern in approximately 2 minutes. Copy. Moving to Phase 2. The group proceeded along the gully until it intersected with the dry creek bed, a natural depression that offered both concealment from aerial observation and a guide path toward their destination. They moved in tactical formation, with Eli on point, the civilians in the center, Ray and Sean protecting the flanks, and Jack covering the rear. The sound of the helicopters grew distant as the aircraft focused on the growing fire, now visible as a significant plume of smoke rising above the ghost town. Jack knew they had a narrow window before the cartel forces realized the fire was a diversion and resumed their search with even greater intensity. "Pace check," he called softly to Eli at the front of their formation. "On schedule," Eli confirmed. "Creek Bend ahead provides additional cover for the next segment." They had covered approximately a quarter of the distance to their base camp when the distinctive sound of an engine reached them, a vehicle approaching along the ridge line above the creek bed. "Hold," Jack ordered, and the group immediately froze in place, pressing against the eroded bank of the creek. A cartel SUV appeared on the ridge, moving slowly as its occupants scanned the terrain. Jack signaled for absolute stillness. Any movement now would draw attention, even without thermal imaging. The vehicle paused almost directly above their position. Jack could hear voices speaking in Spanish, discussing search patterns. His hand moved slowly to his sidearm, calculating angles and priorities if they were spotted. The critical moment stretched into seconds, then a full minute. Finally, the SUV continued along the ridge, moving away from their position. "Clear," Jack whispered once the vehicle was out of sight and hearing range. Resume movement, accelerated pace. They continued along the creek bed with increased urgency, the ground beginning to slope upward as they approached the first of the two ridgelines Marcus had identified. This would be their most vulnerable point, crossing the exposed terrain of the ridge before reaching the cover of the next depression. "Marcus, aerial update?" Jack requested. "Second helicopter has broken from fire response, resuming search pattern. Currently southeast of your position, moving west. Window for ridge crossing approximately 3 minutes." Jack assessed the ridge line ahead. It was approximately 50 meters of exposed terrain, a sprint for his team under normal conditions, but with injured Sean and civilian hostages, it would take longer. "We cross in 2 groups," he decided. Eli leads the first group, David, Linda, and Tom. "Ray, you take Sean, Craig, and follow 30 seconds later. I'll cover from this position, then join you." The plan acknowledged that crossing as a single large group would increase their visibility period. 2 smaller groups moving quickly created a better probability of successful passage. Eli nodded, positioning himself with the first group of civilians at the edge of the creek bed's protection. He waited for Jack's signal, then led them in a rapid ascent up the slope and across the exposed ridgeline. Jack watched tensely as they moved, alert for any sign of detection. The distant sound of the helicopter was growing slightly louder, returning faster than anticipated. They would need to accelerate. "Ray, go now," he ordered, not waiting for the full 30-second interval. Ray led the second group up the slope, Sean moving remarkably well despite his injury, and Craig keeping pace alongside them. As they reached the midpoint of the exposed section, the helicopter's sound suddenly intensified. It had changed course, moving directly toward their position. "Sprint finish," Jack commanded through the comm, its spotted movement. Ray and his group accelerated, practically dragging Craig the final distance to the cover of the next depression. Jack remained in position, ready to provide covering fire if needed. The helicopter appeared over the ridge to their south, its sleek black form immediately beginning a sweeping turn toward the area where movement had been detected. Jack knew their window was closing rapidly. In this critical moment, the radio crackled with Marcus's voice. "Jack, hold position. I have solution." From his concealed position on the northwestern ridge, Marcus had a clean firing line on the helicopter. Jack immediately understood his teammate's intention. "Execute," he confirmed simply. The crack of Marcus's rifle echoed across the terrain. The first shot struck the helicopter's tail rotor assembly with precision. The second penetrated the engine housing. The aircraft immediately began to spin, black smoke pouring from its damaged components. The pilot fought for control, managing to arrest the spin enough to attempt an emergency landing on the ridge approximately 200 meters south of Jack's position. The helicopter hit hard, skidding across the rocky ground before coming to rest, its rotors continuing to turn but the aircraft clearly disabled. Target neutralized, Marcus reported with professional detachment. Be advised, second helicopter and multiple ground vehicles responding to downed aircraft. Recommend immediate movement to rally point. Jack didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted up the slope and across the ridgeline, joining the others in the depression beyond. The team was already moving at maximum sustainable pace toward the next phase of their extraction route. Marcus, exfil to rally point now, Jack ordered. Your position will be compromised once they determine the shot trajectory. Already moving, Marcus confirmed. ETA 9 minutes. They continued through the rough terrain, using natural features for concealment whenever possible. The second ridgeline presented less exposure than the first, with more scattered vegetation providing additional cover. They crossed it without incident, dropping into a shallow ravine that would lead them directly to their base camp. The sound of multiple vehicles and the remaining helicopter converging on the downed aircraft provided cover for their movement. As Marcus had predicted, the cartel forces were prioritizing response to the immediate crisis over continued search operations. 500 meters to base camp. Eli reported from the front of their formation. Jack allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. They had successfully extracted the hostages from immediate danger, neutralized one of the cartel's air assets, and were approaching their vehicles with no immediate pursuit. The operation wasn't complete, but the most critical phase had been accomplished. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of an engine ahead, close, and coming closer. Contact front, Eli warned, dropping to a defensive position. The group immediately took cover behind rocks and scrub brush. Jack moved forward to assess the situation, joining Eli at the head of their formation. Through a gap in the rocks, they could see a single cartel SUV parked directly on their route, approximately 200 meters ahead. Two armed men stood beside it, scanning the terrain with binoculars. Random patrol or deliberate blockade? Eli whispered. Doesn't matter, Jack replied. They're between us and extraction. With Sean injured and 4 civilians to protect, a direct confrontation would be their last resort. Jack studied the terrain, looking for an alternate approach to their base camp. There, he indicated, pointing to a narrow ravine that branched off from their current position. It circles north, then west. Longer route, but should bypass their position. Eli checked their tactical map. That adds at least 15 minutes to our timeline. Jack weighed the options, calculating risks versus the time factor. The fire in the ghost town would eventually be contained, allowing the cartel to refocus their search efforts. The deputies would arrive soon, potentially creating an even more chaotic situation. And Marcus was already en route to the rally point, where he would be isolated if they were significantly delayed. We need to remove the obstacle, Jack decided. 2 cartel members versus his experienced team presented acceptable odds, but they would need to execute flawlessly to avoid alerting other cartel forces. Ray, you and I will neutralize the threat, Jack outlined. Eli, maintain security with the civilians and Sean. Non-lethal approach if possible, but we prioritize silence and speed. Ray nodded, checking his tactical shotgun. The weapon was loaded with less lethal rounds, painful and incapacitating, but not immediately fatal at appropriate range. Approach through the brush line, Jack indicated. I'll circle right, you go left. On my signal. They moved out, using the ravine's contours and vegetation for concealment as they approached the cartel position. Jack circled wide to the east, while Ray took a more direct route through a dense patch of scrub brush. The cartel members remained unaware of their approach, still focused on scanning the more obvious avenues of movement rather than their immediate perimeter. It was a common tactical error, focusing outward without securing your own position. Jack reached his designated position approximately 30 meters from the SUV, concealed behind a rock formation that provided both cover and a clear line of sight. He confirmed Ray was in position with a brief calm click. Execute in 3, 2, 1 now. Jack emerged from cover, his sidearm targeted on the cartel member nearest the SUV. Federal agents. Hands up, he shouted in Spanish, using the deliberate misidentification to create momentary confusion. The cartel members reacted predictably, reaching for their weapons despite the warning. Jack fired twice, striking his target in the shoulder and leg, wounds designed to incapacitate without immediately killing. Simultaneously, Ray fired his shotgun, the less lethal round striking the second cartel member with enough force to throw him against the vehicle. Both threats neutralized, Jack and Ray moved quickly to secure the area. The cartel members were alive but incapacitated, exactly as intended. Jack removed their weapons and communications equipment, while Ray used zip ties to secure them. Vehicle clear, Jack confirmed after checking the SUV. Eli, bring the group up. Within minutes, the entire team had regrouped at the captured vehicle. Jack made a quick decision to appropriate it. Adding a third transport to their extraction capabilities would provide tactical flexibility. Ray, secure these two in the rocks with enough supplies to survive until their people find them, Jack ordered. We're not executioners. As Ray handled this task, Jack coordinated with Marcus via comm, change of plan. We've acquired additional transport. Rally directly at emergency exfil point Alpha. Copy, Marcus acknowledged. Already en route. Sheriff's units have entered the ghost town from the south. Significant engagement with cartel forces in progress. The situation was evolving rapidly. With law enforcement now engaged with the cartel, the window for clean extraction was closing. They needed to be well clear of the area before the scope of the incident expanded further. Mount up, Jack ordered once Ray returned. Eli, you take the civilians in our primary vehicles. Ray, you drive the captured SUV with Sean. I'll ride shotgun to navigate. The group moved quickly to their base camp, where their two tactical vehicles remained undisturbed. Eli efficiently organized the hostages into the first vehicle while Ray and Sean took position in the captured SUV. Head directly to emergency exfil point Alpha, Jack instructed. Maintain calm discipline and legal speeds once we reach the highway. We're just private security contractors completing a training exercise as far as anyone else is concerned. The convoy moved out, taking a carefully planned route that avoided both the ongoing conflict at the ghost town and the likely approach vectors of any responding law enforcement reinforcements. Jack maintained situational awareness, alert for any sign of pursuit or interception. They had been driving for approximately 20 minutes when they reached the designated emergency extraction point. A remote ranch property owned by a former SEAL teammate who had provided Jack's company with a standing arrangement for exactly this type of contingency. Marcus was already there, his position established on the ranch house porch, rifle still at the ready despite the apparent security of their location. Perimeter clear, he reported as the vehicles approached. No signs of pursuit or surveillance. Jack felt the first real sense of relief since the operation began. They had successfully extracted all 4 hostages without loss of life, neutralized a significant cartel threat, and reached secure territory. As the group gathered in the ranch house's main room, the full impact of what they'd accomplished began to register with both the team and the rescued photographers. You people are definitely not just security trainers, David observed, a hint of awe in his voice despite his exhaustion. Jack exchanged glances with his team. The truth was complicated. They were indeed private security trainers now, but their actions today had drawn deeply on capabilities and experience that transcended their current professional identities. Today, we were what you needed us to be, Jack replied simply. Ray had established a makeshift medical station and was properly treating Sean's wound, which looked significantly better after proper cleaning and fresh bandages. You'll live, Ray informed the younger man with gruff affection. But you're still getting full medical evaluation once we reach civilization. Eli was already on a secure satellite phone, coordinating with trusted contacts to ensure the rescued hostages would receive appropriate support and protection once they reached Las Vegas. Federal Task Force on Cartel Activities is sending a team to debrief the witnesses, he reported to Jack. They're very interested in the VIP these photographers accidentally interrupted. Jack nodded, unsurprised. The incident would inevitably draw federal attention given its scale and the cartel leadership's involvement. Marcus, who had been monitoring communications on a specialized receiver, provided an update on the situation they'd left behind. Sheriff's Department called for backup from state police and border patrol. Significant firefight reported. At least 3 cartel fatalities confirmed, multiple arrests in progress. 1 deputy wounded, non-critical. And the cartel VIP? Jack asked. No confirmation either way, Marcus replied. If he was present, he likely extracted during the initial confusion. It was an incomplete resolution, but Jack knew from experience that total victories were rare in conflicts with organizations as resilient and adaptable as the cartels. They had achieved their primary objective, the safety of the hostages, and that would have to be enough. Linda, who had maintained remarkable composure throughout the ordeal, approached Jack. You saved our lives today. Those men were going to kill us. We all knew it. How can we possibly thank you? Jack considered this question thoughtfully. Their intervention had been instinctive rather than calculated, the response of men who had spent their lives standing between threats and potential victims. Live well, he answered finally, and maybe be a little more careful about where you take your photographs in the future. She smiled at this, the tension of their shared ordeal finally beginning to ease. I think we'll stick to more populated ghost towns for a while. As the group settled in to await their federal escort, Jack stepped outside onto the ranch house porch. The desert stretched before him, impassive and unchanged despite the violence that had unfolded within its borders. He felt a presence beside him and turned to find Sean, his arm professionally bandaged, joining him in contemplation of the landscape. We did good today, didn't we, Commander? The younger man asked, momentarily slipping back into the formality of their military days. Jack thought of Caracas, the hostages he couldn't save, the nightmares that had followed him into civilian life. Today hadn't erased that failure, but it had perhaps balanced the scales somewhat. We did what we were trained to do, he replied. What needed doing? Sean nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in Jack's typically economical response. They stood together in companionable silence, 2 warriors who had once again answered the call when innocents were threatened. Behind them, in the ranch house, the rest of the team was already conducting an informal after-action review, analyzing what had worked, what hadn't, and how they could improve their response if ever faced with a similar situation. It was the disciplined approach that had defined their military service and continued to guide their civilian lives. Jack knew that once the immediate situation was resolved, the hostages safely transferred to federal protection, Sean's wound properly treated at a medical facility, their equipment recovered or replaced, they would return to their training business. They would incorporate the lessons from today's improvised operation into their curriculum, transforming even this unexpected crisis into a learning opportunity for the security teams they prepared for dangerous environments. But something had changed, both within himself and within the team. They had been tested outside the controlled parameters of training scenarios and had responded with the full measure of their capabilities. The muscle memory of their shared military experience had engaged seamlessly with their civilian expertise to create something powerful and effective. In that moment, Jack recognized the true purpose of exfil tracks, not just to train others, but to maintain their own readiness for exactly this type of intervention. The world remained dangerous, filled with threats that conventional responders weren't always equipped to address. Today had proven they still had a role to play. As the sun began to set over the desert, casting long shadows across the terrain they had navigated so desperately hours earlier, Jack allowed himself a rare moment of professional satisfaction. Caracas would always be with him, the reminder of what failure cost. But now he had today as well proof that second chances were possible, that experience, when properly applied, could turn potential tragedy into successful resolution. The ghosts hadn't been exorcised, but perhaps they had been answered. 3 days after the Ghost Town incident, Jack sat at his desk in the Exfil headquarters, a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Las Vegas that housed their training facilities, equipment storage, and administrative offices. The space reflected their operations' dual nature, professional and corporate on the surface, with an underlying military precision and readiness that was evident to those who knew what to look for. Before him lay the after-action report he'd spent the morning drafting. Unlike the official reports of his SEAL days, this document would never be submitted to a command structure or filed in government archives. It was for their team only, a meticulous record of what had transpired, what had worked, what hadn't, and the lessons they would incorporate into future training protocols. Jack paused his typing as Ray entered the office, carrying 2 cups of coffee. The team's medic looked rested in a way he hadn't immediately following the operation, the tension that had gripped them all finally beginning to ease. "Thought you could use this," Ray said, placing one of the cups on Jack's desk before settling into a chair opposite him. "How's it coming?" "Almost finished," Jack replied, taking a grateful sip. "Just wrapping up the recommendations section." Ray nodded, his expression turning more serious. "Heard from my contact at University Medical Center. Sean's being discharged today. Clean bill of health. All things considered. Good. Tell him to take the rest of the week. We're postponing the Martinez contract training until Monday anyway." "Already did." Ray paused, studying his longtime friend. "Heard from Eli a few minutes ago. Feds have formally identified our El Comandante from the Ghost Town. Xavier Vargas, mid-level lieutenant in the Sinaloa operation. He's been talking since they picked him up." This was significant news. Their intervention had not only saved 4 innocent lives, but had apparently yielded intelligence that could disrupt cartel operations more broadly. "And the VIP they were waiting for?" Jack asked. "No positive ID yet, but they believe it was Rodrigo Menendez." Jack recognized the name immediately, a high-ranking cartel figure who had eluded law enforcement for years. He was reported killed in that raid in Sonora last year. "Apparently not," Ray replied. "According to Vargas, Menendez has been operating under the radar, rebuilding his network. The Ghost Town was supposed to be a secure meeting location to discuss new smuggling routes. And our photographers were just in the wrong place at the wrong time," Jack concluded. "Classic wrong place scenario," Ray agreed. "Vargas claims they were planning to execute the witnesses and bury them in the mine tunnels. No one would have ever found them. The confirmation of what they had prevented hung between them, a silent validation of their decision to intervene despite the risks." "The photographers?" Jack asked, though he already knew the answer from Eli's previous updates. "Under federal protection until the preliminary hearings, then witness protection program. Their Ghost Town photography book is definitely on hold," Ray added with a hint of grim humor. Jack nodded, returning his attention to the report. The objective outcomes were clear: for civilians saved, a significant cartel operation disrupted, valuable intelligence obtained. By any operational metric, it would be classified as a success. Yet as he typed the final recommendations, Jack found himself reflecting on the less quantifiable aspects of what had transpired. His team had seamlessly transitioned from trainers to operators when circumstances demanded it. The skills and cohesion they'd developed during their military service remained intact, accessible when needed. He thought of Sean, the youngest team member, who had performed admirably under pressure despite his injury. The experience had confirmed Jack's initial assessment of the young veteran's potential, a validation of his decision to bring Sean into the fold despite some initial reservations from the others. "You're thinking about Caracas again," Ray observed, breaking the silence. After nearly 2 decades of friendship, Ray could read Jack's expressions better than most. Jack didn't deny it. "Different outcome this time. Because we were there. Because we acted." Ray leaned forward. "That's what we built Exfil for, isn't it? Not just to train others, but to keep ourselves ready. For moments exactly like this. There was truth in Ray's assessment, though Jack had never articulated it so explicitly before. Exfil tracks had begun as a way to continue serving after their military careers ended, to transfer their knowledge and skills to others operating in dangerous environments. But perhaps subconsciously, they had also been maintaining their own readiness for situations conventional authorities weren't equipped to handle. Maybe, Jack acknowledged. But we can't make a habit of improvised interventions. We got lucky this time. Did we? Or were we just good at what we do? Ray challenged. Everything that happened out there, the assessment, the decision to engage, the extraction, it all followed the principles we teach. We didn't just get lucky, Jack. We were prepared. Before Jack could respond, his phone vibrated with an incoming message. It was from Marcus, who had been handling the equipment recovery and site cleanup. All clear at Site A. Media reporting multi-agency operation against cartel activity. No mention of private contractors. Good news. Their involvement had been effectively obscured by the larger law enforcement narrative, exactly as they'd hoped. The less attention focused on exfil tracks, the better they could continue their work without unwanted scrutiny. The office door opened again, and Eli entered, tablet in hand. "Just got this from our contact at the sheriff's department," he said, placing the device on Jack's desk. It displayed an official letter of appreciation, carefully worded to acknowledge the timely intelligence provided by private security contractors conducting training in the area. Without specifically naming exfil tracks or detailing their direct involvement in the hostage rescue. "Nice of them," Jack commented, scanning the document. "Political cover," Eli observed. "Their way of acknowledging our help while maintaining the official narrative that it was a law enforcement operation. Makes everyone look good." Jack nodded. The arrangement was mutually beneficial. Exfil tracks avoided unwanted attention, while the authorities claimed a clean win against the cartel. "There's more," Eli continued. "David Mercer, the photographer, has been trying to reach us. Apparently, he's a contributing editor at International Security Review. He wants to do a feature on private security training for high-risk assignments." No mention of the Ghost Town incident, just professional profiles. The opportunity was tempting from a business perspective. ISR was respected in the security industry, and the exposure could bring in new clients. But Jack was hesitant. Any media attention carried risks of unwanted scrutiny. "What did you tell him?" he asked. "That I'd pass it along to you," Eli replied. "For what it's worth, he seems genuine. Says he owes us his life and wants to highlight the importance of proper security training in remote locations." Jack considered this. A carefully managed profile could potentially serve their business interests while reinforcing the training-focused image they maintained. If properly handled, it might actually strengthen their cover for the occasional off-the-books operation like the Ghost Town intervention. "Tell him we'll consider it," Jack decided. But any article focuses exclusively on our training methodologies and corporate services. Nothing about our backgrounds beyond the basics. Eli nodded, understanding the parameters. "I'll draft something for your review before responding." As Eli left, Ray stood to follow, pausing at the door. "Dinner at my place tonight. Sarah's cooking. Whole team's invited. Marcus is already confirmed, and I'll pick up Sean on my way. You should come, Jack. After what we've been through, we could all use some normal." Jack appreciated the invitation. Ray's wife, Sarah, a former military intelligence officer herself, was one of the few people outside the team who fully understood the world they inhabited. Her home had become an occasional gathering place, a neutral ground where they could decompress together without the formality of the office or the isolation of their individual lives. "I'll be there," Jack promised. After they left, Jack returned to the report, completing the final section before saving and encrypting the file. The document would join their private archive, a record of lessons learned that would inform their future operations, both the official training contracts and any unofficial interventions that circumstances might demand. His phone chimed with another message, this one from an unknown number. The text was simple. "Thank you for what you did. We're safe now." LM. Linda Mercer. She must have obtained his number from her husband. Jack didn't respond. Maintaining operational security meant minimizing direct contact with those involved. But the message reinforced what they had accomplished. For lives saved, a family kept intact, a future preserved. It was nearly evening when Jack finally left the office, driving through the Las Vegas traffic toward Ray's suburban home. The city's familiar skyline glittered against the darkening desert sky, the neon and glass presenting a stark contrast to the remote ghost town where they had fought for survival days earlier. As he drove, Jack reflected on Ray's earlier observation. Perhaps Exfiltrax was indeed evolving into something beyond its original conception, not just a training company, but a team that maintained the capability and willingness to intervene when unique circumstances aligned with their specific skill set. Not vigilantes, not mercenaries, but professionals who recognized situations where their particular expertise could make a critical difference. The Ghost Town incident wouldn't be their new business model, but it had revealed a capacity they couldn't ignore. Jack parked outside Ray's comfortable two-story home in Henderson, hearing the sounds of conversation and laughter from the backyard as he approached. Marcus was manning the grill, engaged in good-natured debate with Eli about the proper cooking time for steaks. Sean sat nearby, his arm in a sling, but his expression relaxed as he chatted with Sarah. The scene was so normal, so disconnected from the life-and-death scenarios they had navigated days earlier. "There he is," Ray called, handing Jack a cold beer as he joined them. "The man with the plan. The plan that got me shot," Sean added with a grin that contained no real reproach. "The plan that got you back alive," Marcus countered, turning a steak with practiced precision, and added an impressive scar to impress the ladies. The easy camaraderie washed over Jack, familiar and grounding. These men had been his brothers in arms, and now they were something equally important, his partners in building something meaningful beyond their military service. Exfiltrax wasn't just a business. It was their shared purpose, their way of continuing to contribute in a world that still needed their particular skills. As the evening progressed, conversation flowed from casual topics to more reflective discussions of what they had experienced. Without explicitly referencing operational details, they processed the Ghost Town incident as they had countless missions before, acknowledging challenges, celebrating successes, identifying lessons for the future. It was during a quiet moment, as the others were engaged in a heated discussion about upcoming training equipment purchases, that Sarah joined Jack at the edge of the patio. "Ray told me the basics," she said without preamble. "You saved those people when no one else could have." Jack nodded, neither confirming nor denying specifics, a habit from years of classified operations that persisted even among friends. "He also said this one was different for you," she continued, "that it helped with Caracas." Of course, Ray would have shared that insight with his wife. The failed embassy hostage rescue in Caracas had affected the entire team, but Jack, as commander, had carried the heaviest burden of those lost lives. "It doesn't erase what happened," Jack replied after a moment. "But yes, it balances the scales somewhat." Sarah studied him with the perceptiveness that had made her exceptional in intelligence work. "You know, when Ray left active duty, I worried he'd lose his purpose, that the transition would be too hard." She glanced over at her husband, who was demonstrating some tactical technique to an attentive Sean. "But what you've built with Exfiltrax, it's given him a way to keep using his skills for something that matters." "That's the idea," Jack acknowledged. "And now something more," she observed. "After what happened at the Ghost Town, you've proven Exfiltrax isn't just about training. It's about readiness, about being the resource that's there when conventional options aren't enough." Her assessment was remarkably aligned with Jack's own evolving thoughts about their organization's potential. It suggested a direction, not a dramatic change in their business model, but a conscious acknowledgement of a capability they clearly possessed. "Maybe," he conceded, "within certain parameters." Sarah smiled, recognizing the careful qualification of a man who never committed to anything without thorough consideration. "Of course, Parameters are important. She raised her glass slightly. To parameters, then, and to being ready when they align with necessity. Jack tapped his bottle against her glass, accepting the toast and the underlying truth it contained. The Ghost Town incident hadn't just been a successful operation. It had been a transformation of how he viewed Exfiltrax's purpose and potential. As he rejoined the full group, Jack felt a sense of clarity that had been missing since his transition to civilian life. The path forward wasn't about leaving their military experience behind, nor was it about trying to replicate it. It was about applying their unique capabilities in a new context, training others, yes, but also maintaining their own readiness for those rare moments when they were the right resource in the right place at the critical time. Exfiltrax would continue its primary mission of training corporate security teams and specialized units. But now, with the Ghost Town experience as precedent, they would also maintain the protocols, equipment, and mindset to respond when extraordinary circumstances aligned with their particular skill set. Jack looked around at his team, his friends, his brothers, and recognized the same understanding in their expressions. Without needing to formalize it in mission statements or business plans, they had collectively evolved their shared purpose. They were trainers, professionals, business owners. But at their core, they remained what they had always been, men who stood ready when others were in danger. The Ghost Town had simply reminded them of that fundamental truth, and in doing so, had transformed both their future and Jack's perspective on what Exfiltrax could become. 2 weeks after the Ghost Town incident, Jack stood at the window of his Exfiltrax office, watching as a new group of corporate security trainees ran through drills in the facility's tactical simulation area. The Martinez contract was back on track, with Sean even participating as an instructor despite his arms still being in a sling, a visible badge of experience that the trainees regarded with respectful curiosity. On Jack's desk lay the morning's newspaper, folded to a small article buried on page 7. Federal Task Force disrupts major cartel operation. The piece mentioned multiple arrests, significant intelligence gathering, and the rescue of civilian witnesses by law enforcement personnel. Exfiltrax wasn't mentioned, exactly as Jack preferred. His phone buzzed with a text from Eli. Menendez confirmed in custody. Picked up crossing into Guatemala. Ghost Town intel was the key. Jack allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The cartel's defeat was undeniable, not just the tactical victory at the Ghost Town, but the strategic disruption of their operations that had followed. What had begun as a training exercise had cascaded into outcomes that would save countless lives along the border. Though some questioned the extent of their actions during the debriefings, most officials had celebrated the powerful message sent. America does not bow to intimidation, even in its most remote corners. The 4 photographers were rebuilding their lives under new identities, their future secure thanks to the actions of 5 men who had chosen to intervene when all conventional protection had failed. His office door opened as Marcus entered, carrying equipment requisition forms. Training groups performing well, he observed. The Martinez security team might actually be worth their salaries after this. Jack nodded, signing the forms without comment. Their business continued, training, preparing, equipping others to handle dangerous environments. But beneath that visible operation, a new understanding now existed among the team. They remained ready, capable of more when circumstances demanded it. He thought of the hostages, David, Linda, Tom, and Craig. People they'd never met before that day, who had faced execution simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. People now alive because of Exfiltrax's presence and decision to act. Jack, humble yet firm in his convictions, had quietly stepped back from the limelight after the official debriefings, continuing his duties without fanfare. The team had resumed their scheduled training contracts, their calendar booked solid for the next 6 months, their reputation in the security industry enhanced by subtle, professional word of mouth rather than explicit reference to the Ghost Town operation. Outside, Sean was demonstrating extraction techniques to the attentive trainees, his movements precise despite his injury. The youngest team member had grown in confidence since the incident, his performance under pressure earning him new respect from the veterans. Their story stood as a testament to an enduring American truth, that genuine strength lies not in aggression, but in preparedness, resolve, and the unwavering commitment to justice and liberty for all. The ghost town had tested those principles, and Exfiltrax had answered the call. Jack turned back to his desk, where plans for an expanded training facility lay beside proposals for new equipment acquisitions. The future of Exfiltrax stretched before him, a future now enriched by the quiet knowledge that they remained not just trainers but guardians, ready when fate placed them at the intersection of threat and innocence. What do you think about this incredible stand? Do you believe strength alone guarantees justice, or does real power lie in partnership, strategy, and bravery? Share your perspective in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping real-life stories of courage in the face of overwhelming odds.